And welcome back to Creative Thinkers. Again, my name is Miguel Valenzuela, and as always, we bring you a very special guest. Today we have Robert Holguin. He is a person that you might know here in El Paso, and he is the newscaster from KFox 14. Welcome, Robert.
Miguel, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the interview. Great to be here to talk creativity with you and get to know you a little bit better and get to know more about the show.
Well, I'm super excited because we are kind of in the same field, right? And there's a lot of creativity within what we do, but one of the things that's most important is how we came to be what we are, right? So we're individuals that try to come up with new ideas on the fly every single day. So when you were a child, how did that incorporate into what you're doing today?
Well, I always talk about an inciting incident in my childhood. Listen, I've always been a huge fan of cameras. So from when I was very young, I was fascinated with still cameras, and sort of fascinated with the idea of like taking still photos. And then when I was, I don't know, maybe 11 or 12, my dad brought home, he used to work for a junior high in Gadsden. He was the principal there. And for a summer, he brought home a video camera.
Okay.
And that video camera, I feel like, changed my life because I loved just that camera. All summer, you couldn't get me away from that camera, making like home movies with my cousins and like, just like doing interviews and mock interviews and things like that. Then when I was about 13, the other really big moment for me was my uncle was a state police officer in New Mexico. He invited me to go see the space shuttle landing at White Sands, which it had never done and hasn't done since. And the space shuttle program was a big deal at the time. It was a big national story. It kind of fell out of the headlines as it aged, but at that time in the 80s, still huge. So getting to see it land, getting to see all the national media, being interviewed. I was interviewed by the Associated Press. I would later,
really?
Yeah, so I would later go to work. I would go work for the Associated Press when I was older. But when I got to see like the interview in the newspaper, and then I got to see like all the network crews, they always talk about finding your tribe, right? And I just felt like an instant kinship with all the journalists that were there. And just the vibe of the journalists was like something that was just very attractive to me.
And one of the things that you said right now was that it was this one spark, right? Like this one thing that kind of generated everything that has come since, right? How important do you think it is for individuals to go out and experience new things? Because this wasn't something that was kind of premeditated. Hey, you know what? Guess what? The shuttle, by the grace of God, is going to land. Let's go check it out. How important is it, do you think, for any individual to go out and experience new things?
Oh, I think that's huge, right? I mean, I think that's such a huge thing, is to open. I have a friend of mine who is a brilliant musician, and in fact, a documentary that I made about him, his closing argument in the documentary, I'm going to quote him because I think it's what we're discussing right here. He talks about the art of saying yes. Okay. There's the art of saying no, but then there's the art of saying yes, and that means putting yourself in that position where you're just opening the door to, hey, it might be an uncomfortable situation at first. You might feel out of your element, but magic can come from that, right? And also future magic, maybe not that instant, but you're going to meet someone that's going to later connect you to something else, open another door. So there is real truth to that quote, which is, again, I'm quoting Money Mark, and he says, the art of saying yes.
And saying yes, I think, is important also, because one of the things that we talk about in this show a lot is creativity. And I feel through my education and what I've been teaching students here at El Paso Community College that I've gotten a chance to understand that a lot of people say no more than they say yes. Like, they say no to creativity, and it's not because it is something that is inherent to them. It is something that has been, I guess, through society taught to them. How do you feel that creativity is important to what you are doing now, and how did that creativity get you to what you're doing now?
Well, I think creativity is really very important to what I do on a day-to-day basis, because you're trying to, as a journalist, not only tell stories that matter to the public, that are important to the public, that have an impact on people's lives and all that, but you often need to do it in a way that, especially these days, can maintain people's attention. Right. Like to make sure that we're in the market of keeping those eyeballs, because the competition is vast right now.
And they're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
How will you stand out?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. How will you stand out? How does this thing, thinking outside the box, help you guys succeed or help anybody succeed?
Well, what do you think? Like, I'll turn it around on you here. I'll ask you, like, how do you think that people can think of approaching day-to-day tasks with creativity?
Well, if you ask me as an individual, so thank you for asking that first of all. If you ask me, one of the most important things is for us to see things from a different perspective. And one of the things that I come back to many times is I had an experience with a student, and that student said, you know what, I see that you are a very happy individual, just the way that you present yourself and the way you bring yourself and your persona to our class every day. I feel like I'm a very sad individual, maybe not as happy as you are. Can you give me a little bit of insight as to how you get that way? And I said, well, I'm not really sure why I'm so happy, but let me get back to you the next class. So I thought about it. I had to contemplate for a moment. What exactly is it that I'm doing that I think sets me apart from most people? And it turned out that what I did was that because I filled my mind, my heart, all of myself with only beautiful things, these nice things that I see, like a ladybug or a flower or my significant other. When I fill myself with all of these things, then I really don't have any other room to put negativity into it. So my answer to him was, because I think and view the world in a different way, I don't just think of a bug as a bug. I don't just think of a flower as a flower. I think of it as design, as purpose, as color, as shape, as form. And because I'm thinking outside the box, because I'm thinking of it as this wonderful thing, then I don't have time to fill it up with things that aren't so wonderful, which in turn makes me a very happy individual. So I think that seeing things from a different perspective is the most important thing. How can we do that? There are tools that one can use. For example, when we read something, like, for example, this bug XYZ is not a good thing, then we start to contemplate and make associations to other bugs, for example. Then we start hating things, and then we put that little negative grain of sand in, which then in turn doesn't allow us to open our minds. So the one thing that we need to do, I think the exercise that we need to do, is just kind of empty our minds of this negativity, and I think that the creativity will then come.
You know, you mentioned empty your mind. That's so interesting, because what you're talking about reminds me of a pretty well-known book for athletes, for professional athletes. I remember listening to the author talk about this, and it's called, I think, 10-Minute Toughness. I might be getting that wrong, but it was a book that came out about 10 years ago. And what he said was, as like an athlete, anytime you let a negative thought get into your head about, you know, if you're in a batting slump or whatever, that negative thought, you have to immediately counter it with like 10 minutes of positive thinking. Because otherwise those things have a way of just taking root. Do you find that? Yeah.
Oh yeah,
because it sounds like what you're describing.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And one of the things that I think that helps me as an individual is just having that open mind constantly. I'm not the type of individual that sits there and ponders these negative things. I allow them to happen because they need their space, 100%. But then after that moment in time is over, then I need to clear it out and move forward, because if not, then you do end up in a slump. Even if you're contemplating this negative thought, like I can't hit well anymore, then when you go up to bat, then you can't hit well. But if you say, well, I didn't hit well at that moment in time, but tomorrow I'm going to do better, you've already countered it. So I think that that's what we need to do over and over again.
Did that student that asked you that question, which is, I find interesting that the student, what an insightful question to ask you, right? Did that student take to heart, you know, when you came back with the answer?
He absolutely did, which was beautiful. That's why I teach what I teach. You know, I teach art appreciation because art appreciation is a place for me to allow myself to enlighten students, and I think enlightening is what we're here to do, and that's why we have this show, which is why we keep talking about all this creative aspects of what we do. So when you talk about creativity and how it incorporated into your life, when you were a child, do you think that somebody helped you understand this creativity? Was it only that one camera?
Yeah, I don't think I came from like a I mean, we came from a working class household, you know, like I came from no one was doing necessarily really creative things. I will say that, like, it was interesting to, like, my mother was always involved in, you know, like she would learn about crafting clay or something, and then learn to fire things in the oven.
She did that.
Yeah,
Nice.
so she would kind of do these things, and these things were happening in the periphery, you know, and even something as strange as my parents were actually beekeepers as well.
See?
So, seeing that, right?
Yeah.
Like, just like you wouldn't
That's
think
outside the box.
It definitely
When
is,
do you
right?
have your neighbor be a beekeeper? You know what I mean?
And have hives inside the living room.
No way, really?
Yeah, they're extracting. When they would extract the honey, they have to bring them inside, you know. But seeing all these things,
All mom the bees.
yeah, they'd get in. They would get in. But I think in terms of anything, like, I never had an example of, like, hey, you can make movies, you can get into television or do production work. I didn't really have that exposed to me until probably college. But I did always just at least keep an open eye, and the initial thing that fed me was photography. You know, like, at least photography I could do on a real basic level, but it really helped me eventually get to the point now where I shoot my own stories. Now, typically, let's say someone in my position here, like a reporter in the old days, used to go out with a photographer, right? And we still have dedicated photographers that I could work with, but I choose to shoot my own stories because I love the process of visually storytelling, and that is traced all the way back to that camera that my dad brought me back.
Oh,
when I was,
wow.
You know, I mean, absolutely traces back to that. It's a straight line.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
But one of the other things that we can talk about is our story, because we actually have similar stories.
We do,
and how we got into this whole thing of television media.
That's right.
You know, give us the gist of it, because it's really almost uncanny. How did you get into being a newscaster?
So I get into journalism in college, and I really enjoy it. I was lucky enough to have a fantastic professor, the department head at NMSU. His name was Sean McClanagan, and he was the department head at NMSU, and was just excellent at fostering confidence in young students and making you believe that you know you had something there.
You can do it.
Yeah, like he was key in that. And so I get into journalism, and my first job is in newspaper reporting. I was with the Associated Press. I worked in newspapers, and eventually I was also interested in making films. So I moved back to El Paso to make a film, to make like you know, my first feature film. And in the interim, I start working at the El Paso Times. When I work at the El Paso Times, we used to cover Juarez a lot more than we cover it now. I think that one of the sad things that's happened post 9/11 is that, and you know, in the years since, the border has become more and more restrictive.
Yes,
right?
I remember the good old days.
Yeah, it was really quite easy to just go across the border and, you know, sister cities, truly.
Right.
And people say sister cities now, but I sometimes feel like that bottleneck gets throttled more and more.
Right.
But anyway, we covered Juarez extensively, and one of the stories that I covered extensively was the murders, the femicides in Juarez, which were, you know, hundreds of women that were killed mysteriously over the course of many years. And
interestingly enough, sorry to interrupt you, but I also did a lot of artwork based on that. I also attended an MSU, and one of the reasons why I attended an MSU is because I wanted to stay near the border. So as I was creating artwork,
that makes perfect sense.
As I was creating artwork, I said, if I go to New York, how am I going to be in the thick of things? So I need to be here close to the border and actually get my education while I'm at the place where I'm creating this work of art. So you're doing the reporting, you're having all of this come out via the newspaper, and then how in the world does that shift happen into, you know, in front of a TV camera?
So I get interviewed as an expert. You know, I mean, I guess I was, in terms of a journalist, I was someone who covered the subject matter extensively. So I was interviewed by the local ABC affiliate here, you know, many years ago, as an expert on the field. You know, and I did like much like this, sort of a talk show with them. And the news director there saw me on that and said, hey, you know, you're pretty good at this. Do you want to try being on TV? And so I thought about it, and I was ready to make a change. I was either going to move or make a change. And I made the change to TV, and I'm so glad I did. That was 20 plus years ago. And yeah, TV was a much better fit for my skill set. You know, I think I was a pretty good newspaper reporter, but all of that really helped me become a very good TV reporter. And then eventually my personality brings the on-camera element to it.
Right. How important was that shift for you, though, being who you are today? Because when you're writing behind the scenes and writing something for a newspaper, you're really not that personality. You're just a name. When you become a personality, then you become something different. How did that do anything for what you're doing today? How did that help you become who you are? You know, as far as you know, becoming a much more vibrant individual, an individual who has a lot more to say, you know, you're in the limelight now.
That's a great question, because I've not given that a lot of thought in terms of how that might have changed my approach to journalism. I'd have to think about that, but I think just giving, like, what first comes to mind is I was not comfortable being on camera. So
really?
That wasn't my...
There was a learning curve of sorts.
For sure. And even to this day, Miguel, I will tell you that I don't think, like, listen, I've worked with people, you know, especially when I worked in Los Angeles, I worked with people who absolutely live for the camera. They live for that lens, and they live to be on that camera. You know? I don't have that in me necessarily. If I could do the same work that I'm doing, and if I'm never on camera, that's okay with me. It truly is. But your question is a good one in the sense that, like, how do we... listen, I think the work that we do, for me, putting my face on it means I have to be that much more diligent in what I do and careful with what I do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm adding credibility to it.
Yeah, not that my byline was important to me too, of course. There's ownership there. But yeah, when it's your face on that report, and when you're the one saying it, especially even as an anchor now, because your face is on for the duration of that newscast. You know, so you are taking ownership, and that is part of the job. Part of the job is making sure that the words that are coming out of your mouth are accurate, because that's your face that's saying that. So, you know, sometimes we don't write the things we say, but I sure take the time to edit what I say, because to
make sure it comes out right.
Yeah, because if I can't, and if something comes out wrong, it's very frustrating, because that is you, that's your credibility.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. But you know, you talk about the stories, and the stories are extremely important. Just like my artwork is important, through a story you're giving information, right?
Yes.
You go out and do research, you go out and kind of see what's going on, try to get the facts together. How important is it for you to allow yourself a little bit of freedom and flexibility within the stories? You know, a lot of times when I make a mistake in my artwork, I allow myself the flexibility to keep moving forward. Is it important for you to do that, or are you set into these very, very strict guidelines? Because I think it all goes along with the creative aspect.
Well, first of all, I'd love to answer the question, but your question makes me think of a question, which is, what do you mean when you say make a mistake in your artwork and moving forward?
So for me, mistakes, and Bob Ross said it best, right? You know, we make happy mistakes. So as artists, we need to understand that we do have that flexibility to keep moving forward. If I use the wrong paint color, for example, I can change the paint color. It's not set in stone for me. When I say that I want a square frame as opposed to a rectangular frame, I'm not set and bound by those rules. I can make those changes, and because I have the flexibility to, I think that I give a better performance through my artwork. I create a better piece, and that's what I'm talking about. Do you allow yourself the flexibility to take the information and regurgitate it in a way that is more open to the public?
Yes, absolutely. That's interesting. I guess I'd never heard of an artist describe. That makes perfect sense the way you say it, but I'd never stopped to think about that, about how you would overcome what might be like a technical or mechanical mistake in the artwork to achieve.
And it might be something that's a thought process, you know,
Yeah.
I'm going in the wrong direction.
Okay.
But is it really the wrong direction? Because this brings me to a fork in the road, and that fork in the road will then take me left or right. And maybe they're both correct, but at some point you have to make that choice. And that, I guess, is where my question comes from. When we have the opportunity to make choices, are we always set to this one realm, this one avenue, or can we go left if we want to go left?
Okay, so that
Because you're talking
perfectly.
about like factual things, you know?
Yes,
Yeah.
but what you're talking about is actually a key component in the growth of a journalist,
Right.
Which is that sometimes what you think is the story is not the story.
Yes.
And that's a really interesting thing to
Yes.
watch develop, especially in young journalists, because you feel like you have an assignment. The assignment is this: I'm covering City Hall. City Hall is changing this policy.
Yes.
But really what's going on is something else opens. You hear something, the interview reveals something, and in that revelation, you get something completely different, but you have to have your ears open.
Yeah.
You have to be an active
Yes,
listener.
yes.
You have to be engaged, and then be creative enough to pivot.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's exactly right. And having said that, we're in a show called Creative Thinkers, and Creative Thinkers is a show that I created in order for people to get a better understanding of what this thing called creativity is.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for our viewers? And it can be any type of advice, and I want to have a short conversation about this because we run out of time very quickly in the show.
Yeah, well, it was a great conversation, but I think that the only advice I would have is sort of what the things that we've already touched on, pardon me, which is the art of saying yes, the art of not thinking that you're limited to one thing. When I was growing up, like I said, luckily I had these influences, and I had some people that either showed me a couple of tools or took me to a couple of things that influenced me.
Right.
But I don't think my mindset was, I didn't really believe I could do any of these things until maybe I was 20 or 21. And one thing that I talk about with a friend of mine who's a very good musician, a friend of mine who we grew up with together, we
Right.
grew up playing music, was, man, if we would have just been exposed and had understood that like anyone can like try to be a band and make it professionally. Anyone can try, but anyone can try to like create a TV show or create something. And unfortunately, you know, growing up in rural New Mexico at the time, you know, you just didn't think that those were possible.
Right.
You didn't think those were reality. But they are, you know, they are reality. Like the people that are doing all these things are no different than you or I.
That's
just
exactly right.
They're just people who have just taken the chance,
Right.
And say to themselves that I'm going to try it. And there's nothing wrong with that, especially when you're young. You know, like take swings, take a swing at something. That would be it.
Yeah, and when you're taking swings, you get the opportunity to take these different avenues, right? Because as you were talking about the stories, I found something very interesting within what you said. You know, the story may be within the story, right?
That's right.
The route of your life, the road of your life may be within that other small road that you take,
that's
right?
perfect. That's perfect.
And it's not about you saying, you know what, this is the highway. I have to take the highway because this is the road that was built for me. You have to give yourself that opportunity to get off of the beaten path and say, is this another road for me to take? Is this something that will help me grow into what I'm going to become in the future? Which I think is great because even though when you were younger, you always had this kind of passion and affinity for what you're still doing today, but you could have gone in many different directions. And I assume that at some point you did go in different directions. Am I always going to be a journalist? Maybe not. Maybe I want to be a newscaster or whatever, which is part of journalism.
Yeah.
But you allowed yourself that openness to think outside the box, to be that individual that said, hey, you know what, if this isn't the path, I can always pivot, which I believe is one of the most beautiful things that you said, just the aspect of being able to pivot in many ways. So in the future, do you have any like stories that are coming up that are insightful things that you can talk about? Maybe another movie that you're going to want to do?
So I've just finished work. It's like we are in the process of signing the paperwork. So I made my first feature-length documentary.
Wow.
Hour and a half. It's a music documentary. It's I mentioned Money Mark, old friend of mine, music producer, used to play with the Beastie Boys, and he's done a million things.
Right.
And he made an album out here with a comedy group. It's sort of a strange collaboration.
Right.
But I was able to film the whole process. And
cool.
it's been a 2-year journey. I've never done anything that took that long. And so
from 1 minute and a half to 2 years,
yeah,
that's a huge leap.
Exactly, exactly. So this 2-year journey ends up in this documentary that's called Blood, Sweat, and Beers.
Nice.
It should be available on all platforms by summer.
Okay.
So fingers crossed.
Awesome. I hope that it's going to go well, and I'm sure it will, because you have been a very successful individual in our city and all around. So I want to thank you for taking the time out to actually come out here and have a nice conversation. And one of the other things I wanted to thank you is the pivot that you did in the middle of the interview to interview me for a little part. I think that was fantastic and great. You're always on the job, I guess.
Always.
So thank you for taking the time out.
Thank you,
and
man.
thank you for joining us here on Creative Thinkers.
Thank you for the opportunity.
I hope you enjoyed yourself.
I did.
And I wanted to thank everybody out there for joining us once again. We will always bring you guys somebody special. And if you guys want to get in touch with me, maybe you want to suggest somebody, you guys can email me at mvalen31@epcc.edu. And we will see you guys next time. Thank you very much.